So here we are. It's June 2021, and after 15 months of lockdowns, mandates, business closures, canceled celebrations, suicides, isolation, it's all finally coming to an end. So, where's the joy? Think about it. For an entire generation, either born after or too young to really feel that visceral shock of 9/11, this is the biggest threat to their selfiehood that they've ever had to face. Now take a look at this. Here's the Center for Disease Control data for May 27, 2021. 33,018,965 cases to date, which, by happy coincidence for those of us who are mathematically impaired, works out to almost precisely 10% of the current U.S. population of 332 million. Now that means that an American 24-year-old male did not have a 99.992% chance of surviving COVID-19. It means that he had a 99.992% chance of survival, assuming that he happened to be one of the 1 in 10 people who contracted the virus in the first place. Now, here's a chart of COVID deaths in blue relative to total deaths in gray. The data goes through February 17, 2021. For the 15 through 24 and 25 through 34-year age group, the number of COVID deaths are just too small to see on this graph. From 35 to 44, it becomes visible, and then it increases steadily as people get older. But why is it that the further down this chart you go, the more likely you are to die from COVID, but the less afraid of it you are, as a general rule? You know, in all the pandemics of human history, mortality and fear went hand in hand. The more likely you were to die, the more afraid of it you were. It was a direct correlation. But this time, however, the less likely you were to die, the more afraid you became. It's an inverse correlation. Pandemics have been with us forever, but this is new because this isn't about the virus. This is about the host. And that means that we need to get into the biology of fear. Now, to paraphrase George Washington, fear is a handy servant, but a dangerous master. As a servant, fear has kept us alive, both as individuals and as a species. But like some 19th century English duchess making a passage to Africa, fear comes with baggage, a lot of baggage, trunks and trunks and trunks of it in some cases, and an entire army of servants to carry it too, all of it being hauled through the jungle on safari, and virtually none of it needed or even useful. Too much fear is simply extra baggage. Now, not everyone is burdened by excessive fear. Most of us pack a couple of bags. Some of us are lucky enough to have just enough fear to fit in the overhead compartments, and a precious few of us carry all of their fear in a shaving kit. And fear is like baggage in another way as well. The more traveling you do, the less you pack. Don't forget that. That's going to be important in a minute. Now, all animals exhibit fear, so humans are not particularly special in that regard. But we do have one quality that utterly sets us apart from the rest of the animals here on Earth, and it's not intelligence. There's an entire spectrum of animal intelligence on this planet. Now, the one thing that humans have alone among all the animals of the Earth is imagination. And like fire and fear, imagination is the most powerful of servants and the cruelest of masters, because it is imagination that allows us to be afraid of things that are not here. Imagination allows us to cast fear into the future. Fear plus imagination equals worry, and Homo sapiens is the worrying animal. Humans are spectacularly successful because we are worry machines. Now, worrying about things can be useful, and in some cases, it's essential. The problem with being worry machines is not the function, it's the calibration. So what calibrates the biology of fear? Well, ladies and gentlemen, meet your amygdala. Two small, almond-sized clusters buried deep behind and below the frontal lobes of the cerebral cortex, which is where we do all of our worrying. Interestingly enough, these two small areas of the brain are not symmetrical, and even more interesting is how they vary. The right hemisphere amygdala is more developed in men than in women. Furthermore, it's more developed in heterosexual men and homosexual women than it is in heterosexual women and homosexual men. In other words, straight men and lesbians have a more developed right hemisphere amygdala than straight women and gay men. And you might want to sit down for this one. The right hemisphere of the amygdala is more pronounced in people who identify as conservatives than it is in those that identify as progressives. When stimulated, the right hemisphere of the amygdala produces negative reactions like fear and sadness, and only negative reactions. But the left hemisphere, the one more developed in women, gay men, and progressives, can sometimes produce fear and sadness, but sometimes threat stimuli to the left side can also produce positive emotions. The right side sees a threat and delivers an electric shock. The left side sees a threat and it may deliver an electric shock, or it might give you a cookie. Those left side mixed signals make it very difficult for people who have prominently left side amygdala to calibrate the appropriate level of fear. So how many times have you seen this movie? New guy arrives at the living hell of frontline combat. A grizzled veteran is taking nervous new guy to his barracks when a shell whistles overhead. The new guy hits the deck, arms over his head. The grizzled veteran looks down at him and says something to the effect of, "Those aren't the ones you have to worry about." So, why does the rookie hit the deck at the sound of an incoming artillery round while the veteran just stands there? Well, it's because the veteran has survived this kind of stimulation many, many times, and his amygdala has learned that shells that make one sound are going to pass over your head, while those that make a different sound will not. Look, an ear-shattering explosion just a few yards over there is a terrifying experience. Hitting the deck is a smart move. It's practically automatic. But the veteran stays on his feet because our hair-trigger amygdala, which calibrates the fear response, directly communicates with the cerebral cortex, that orderly, rational part of the brain. And over time, that hit the deck, fight or flee reflex is cut off because the cortex tells the amygdala that this particular sound has not caused any injury in the past and is unlikely to do so now. Now, the biological term for this repetition of stimuli is long-term potentiation. Here's the Wikipedia entry. In neuroscience, long-term potentiation, or LTP, is a persistent strengthening of synapses based on recent patterns of activity. These are patterns of synaptic activity that produce a long-lasting increase in signal transmission between the two neurons. The opposite of LTP is long-term depression, which produces a long-lasting decrease in synaptic strength. LTP is widely considered to be one of the major cellular mechanisms that underlies both learning and memory. In other words, the more you use this threat assessment hardware, the better it works. And the less you use it, the worse it works. Fear is like baggage. The more you travel, the less you pack. Losing a Little League baseball game, or skinning a knee by falling off a bike, breaking an arm, climbing a tree, all of the little stresses that we're supposed to experience in childhood teaches your brain what is dangerous and what is relatively harmless. As far as evolution is concerned, that's the only reason to play in the first place. We learn how to calibrate threat. So why do young people have an inverse reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic? In other words, why is it that those least likely to die from the virus are the ones who are most afraid of it? Why is that? Well, the answer is, the more you try to protect kids from frightening experiences, the more fearful they become. If you met an adult who was afraid of the dark, or who had an absolute meltdown over something trivial, you would say that that person is acting childishly. And the reason that that adult is acting childishly now is because they were prevented from acting childishly back when they were children. This is a Disney princess bubble shooter, and this is the Hello Kitty counterpart. Which one to choose? Well, these were the timeless questions two 5-year-old girls were debating while waiting for the bus to take them home from kindergarten back in early 2013. Now, there's really only one way to settle these things. "I'll shoot you," one of the girls said. "You shoot me, and we'll all play together." But thank God, Mount Carmel Elementary School Principal Susan Nestico was on the scene to prevent the blood and bubble bath. The 5-year-old was given a 10-day suspension for that remark, and the reason given on the suspension form was that the kindergartner was, quote, "making a terrorist threat." Right around this time, 7-year-old domestic terrorist Josh Welsh was trying to chew a Pop-Tart into the shape of a mountain. Now, this person of interest bit off more than he could chew, apparently, because it ended up looking like a gun. If you happen to be a fully grown neurotic like Josh's second grade teacher who thought she heard him say bang, bang. That got Josh a 2-day suspension because he, quote, used food to make an inappropriate gesture, unquote. Well, I can tell you one thing. If I'd been William Welsh, Josh's father, I would not have been able to resist the compulsion to add an inappropriate gesture of my own. It wasn't a big deal to him, said the perp's father, so he figured he could just go bang, bang, and he was just playing around. Now, fortunately, the murder suspect learned his lesson, and that lesson is don't you ever, ever use your imagination again. But everyone else in the class learned that a Pop-Tart in the general shape of a pistol should cause exactly the same level of panic and hysteria among adults as a real pistol would. Parenthetically, all communists hate gun ownership, and they hate Pop-Tarts too, the godless swine. In 2014, an Ohio high school student texted a picture of a gun to his middle school friend. That friend showed the picture to the teacher. The teacher contacted the police, and the entire school went into lockdown. Officers and deputies located the suspect while maintaining a safety perimeter around the school, reported WKYC. Each and every one of those policemen armed with Photoshop carried in up-armored laptops in case the JPEG resisted arrest. And Corlewance Hicks, 16, was charged with inducing panic, which is a third-degree felony and which will mark him for the rest of his life. It's been a signal honor of my life to have become friends with both an active-duty SEAL team member and a highly decorated combat fighter pilot. Neither one of them gets the vapors when they see kindergarten girls wielding Hello Kitty bubble machines or pastry pistols or photos of a gun or photos of a gorilla or a vampire or a zombie for that matter. And the reason they don't get hysterical about these things is because both of them have been shot at repeatedly by real people with real guns who are trying to kill them. They're the two most fearless men I know. And the reason they're so fearless is because they've been scared shitless by the real thing many, many times. You know, I was much more afraid of COVID in March of 2020 than I was in April of 2020. In March, we had projections. In April, we had data. Now, those of us with a well-calibrated amygdala assessed the threat based on the data and weighed the danger from COVID-19 against all of the other threats we've survived, and then we put the fear not at zero, but at a level appropriate to our risk groups and weighed all of that against all the other threats we have to deal with daily. After having lived through the Depression and the war, nothing scared the greatest generation. Most of them are gone now, but they would have laughed COVID-19 to the rafters. Their children, boomers like me, didn't have to go through that, but we did spend the first half of our lives convinced that we would not live to see 30 years of age because the Soviet Union had 25,000 hydrogen bombs in silos pointed right at us and ready to go. And we knew that our chance of surviving a full-scale thermonuclear war was considerably less than 99.98%. That life of threat assessment helped us calibrate our response to what COVID-19 actually turned out to be. The reason so many people did not and do not want to give up wearing the mask is not because they were and remain frightened. It's because they were and remain unreasonably frightened. And the people who were unreasonably frightened hated the fact that many of us weren't unreasonably frightened. They loved the lockdown because the masks and the social distancing and all the rest was a form of coerced cowardice. We're all wearing masks because the law said we had to, and for one shining golden year, everyone had to act as unreasonably, hysterically terrified as they are all the time.